So now we come to Friday, April 3rd, AD 33. The trials of Jesus, begun in the early morning hours, begin with the Jews, and they involve a brief appearance from Herod Antipas. But ultimately, the decision under God must rest with the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. A crucifixion, of course, was not a punishment invented only for Jesus, so it'll be helpful for us to learn a little bit of the history behind this barbaric form of torture in Roman times. If the disciples then could have heard that we now refer to this as Good Friday, they undoubtedly would have been perplexed, perhaps even offended, due to the suffering, shame, and humiliation that Christ endured. But while it's easy for us to focus only upon Christ's sufferings, for those of us with eyes to see, there's also glory to be found in this most important of days in salvation history.
Well, now we're up to the first Good Friday, and actually the action begins just before dawn when the Sanhedrin has to convene one last time in order to endorse what they had decided the night before, that Jesus should die. Because according to Jewish law, you cannot sentence a man to death in a night session. So this is why Luke carefully tells us that the Sanhedrin met on Friday morning, and they simply endorsed what they had done the night before at the Caiaphas hearing, and that is Jesus must die. They learned the process of crucifixion from, indeed, the Persians. They crucified some of their admirals after they lost the first naval battle to the Romans in the First Punic War in the 3rd century BC. And then used it in Rome only for extreme criminals. Those who were not Roman citizens could be crucified for serious crime. The whole idea is, look what this poor miscreant is suffering. Don't do what he did, or you're going to get hung up on the cross the same way. And therefore, it is a way of preventing further crime, they thought, in addition to giving the miscreant a very horrible way to die.
When we look at the way the Gospels, the different Gospels, present Jesus' suffering at the cross, Matthew, Mark, and Luke tend to focus more on the humiliation that Jesus endured and on the physical pain that he endured. While John, probably writing last, presents the cross more as a station back to the glory that Jesus had before the world began. It's not so much that he minimizes the physical suffering that Jesus endured, but he shows that the spiritual reality of glory being brought to the Father even at the cross overrides any physical suffering that he may have had to endure. And of course, the writer to the Hebrews as well says that Jesus endured the cross for the joy set before him. So you see in the biblical material this emphasis that the suffering was a necessary pathway to eternal glory.
Beginning in Mark chapter 14, beginning with verse 32. And they went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took with him Peter and James and John and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch. And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will. And he came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came the third time, and he said to them, Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. And immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard. And when he came, he went up to him at once and said, Rabbi, and he kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Jesus said to him, Have you come out against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled. And they all left him and fled. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body, and they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. And they led Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together. And Peter had followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest. And he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands. Yet even about their testimony did not agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst, asked Jesus, Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? But he remained silent and made no answer. And again the high priest asked him, Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. And the high priest tore his garments and said, What further witness do we need? You've heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, Prophesy! And the guards received him with blows. And as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came. And seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, You also were with the Nazarene, Jesus. But he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you mean. And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, This man is one of them. But again he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean. But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, I do not know this man of whom you speak. And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus said to him, Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he broke down and wept. As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation, and the elders and scribes and the whole council, and they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." And the chief priest accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. Now at the feast, he used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to them, "Then what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him!" And so Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. And the soldiers led him away inside the palace, that is, the governor's headquarters. And they called together the whole battalion, and they clothed him in purple cloak, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. And they began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they were striking his head with a reed, and spitting on him, and kneeling down in homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put on his own clothes, and then led him out to crucify him. And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them to decide what each should take. And it was the third hour when they crucified him. And the inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified two robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "Aha! You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." So also the chief priests and the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also reviled him. And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "Behold, he's calling Elijah." And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly this man was the Son of God." Church family, it's not my intention today to deliver a message in a technical sense. I just wanted to take a moment on this Friday, this Good Friday, to just draw our attention to the specifics of what makes this day good. You know, what an example of divine providence for God to time at this moment for mine and your lives to pretty much strip away our normal routine. Everything that you and I would normally be leading up to, the busyness of what we call Resurrection Sunday, we're not able to do those things. Right now, we're able, in God's incredible divine providence, to focus our attention right now for just a short time on the implications of this day. Paul writes, "For those who are perishing, the cross of Jesus Christ is foolishness, absolute folly. But to those of us who are being saved, it is the power of God." Father, forgive us so many times of this season where we made this day more than what you intended it to be, more in the sense of adding things to your incredible plan that needs absolutely, positively no additions. So right now, Father, on behalf of all of us who are watching this episode, clear everything out of our hearts and minds. Give us and restore to us the joy of our salvation, your power in the death and resurrection of your Son, Jesus Christ. What a day, what a Friday that you chose to save the world. To that end, Father, be honored and glorified, and your Son, Jesus Christ, exalted, so that in this season around the world, he would draw all men to himself for your honor, your glory, and your Son's exaltation. It's in Christ's name that I pray. Amen. It's Friday. It's only Friday. Sunday's coming.
It's Friday. Jesus is praying. Peter's sleeping. Judas is betraying. But Sunday's coming. It's Friday. Pilate's struggling. The council is conspiring. The crowd is vilifying. They don't even know that Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The disciples are running like sheep without a shepherd. Mary's crying. Peter is denying. But they don't know that Sundays are coming. It's Friday. The Romans beat my Jesus. They robe him in scarlet. They crown him with thorns. But they don't know that Sunday's coming. It's Friday. See Jesus walking to Calvary. His blood dripping. His body stumbling. And his spirit's burdened. But you see, it's only Friday. Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The world's winning. People are sinning. And evil's grinning. It's Friday. The soldiers nailed my Savior's hands to the cross. They nailed my Savior's feet to the cross. And then they raised him up next to criminals. It's Friday. But let me tell you something. Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The disciples are questioning what has happened to their king. And the Pharisees are celebrating that their scheming has been achieved. But they don't know it's only Friday. Sunday's coming. It's Friday. He's hanging on the cross, feeling forsaken by his Father, left alone and dying. Can nobody save him? Oh, it's Friday, but Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The earth trembles. The sky grows dark. My King yields his spirit. It's Friday. Hope is lost. Death has won. Sin has conquered. And Satan's just a-laughing. It's Friday. Jesus is buried. A soldier stands guard, and a rock is rolled into place. But it's Friday. It is only Friday. Sunday is a-coming.